The first gunshot that rang out across Willow Creek, Colorado, on that sweltering summer day of 1878 changed everything for Zara Fairchild. She clutched her worn carpetbag tighter as whispers followed her down the dusty Main Street, her reputation having somehow arrived before she did. "That's her, the fallen woman from Denver," a shopkeeper's wife hissed to her companion, not bothering to lower her voice. "Heard she worked in one of them fancy houses before she got too old for the job." Zara kept her chin high despite the burning in her cheeks. At 26, she was hardly old, but life had etched lines around her eyes that spoke of hardships most proper ladies would never understand. The accusations weren't entirely wrong, but they weren't the whole truth either. Life had given her impossible choices, and she'd made the only ones she could to survive. The second gunshot made her jump. It came from the saloon up ahead, the Silver Dollar, where a commotion was spilling out onto the boardwalk. Two men wrestled through the batwing doors, one clearly having the upper hand. "Take it back," roared the taller man, his voice carrying down the street as he pinned the other against a post. His broad shoulders strained against his worn denim shirt, and the leather vest he wore over it marked him as a working cowboy. The hat that had fallen from his head revealed thick russet hair that caught the afternoon sun. "Just repeating what I heard, Lynch," the smaller man whined. "They say she's coming to open her own." The cowboy's fist connected with the man's jaw before he could finish. Sheriff Mills appeared from his office, hand on his holster. "That's enough, Reed. You can't beat up every man who runs his mouth in this town." The cowboy Reed released his opponent, who slumped against the post. He retrieved his hat, dusting it against his leg before settling it back on his head. "Then maybe folks ought to mind their own business, Sheriff." That's when Reed Lynch turned and saw her standing there, frozen in the middle of the street, clutching her belongings like they might save her from the judgment of the crowd that had gathered to witness the altercation. Their eyes met across the distance, and something passed between them, recognition of a sort, though they'd never met. He saw her, really saw her in a way that made Zara feel exposed yet somehow not judged. Sheriff Mills followed Reed's gaze. "I suppose that's her now." He sighed heavily. "Miss Fairchild, I presume?" Zara nodded, finding her voice. "Yes, sir. I've come about the shop space." The whispers intensified around her. A woman opening a business in Willow Creek was unusual enough. A woman with her reputation was downright scandalous. "Planning to bring your Denver business here?" someone called out nastily. Reed Lynch stepped down from the boardwalk, his spurs jingling with each purposeful stride as he crossed to her. The crowd parted for him. He was clearly someone of standing in the small community despite his rough appearance. "Miss Fairchild," he said, tipping his hat to her. "Reed Lynch. I believe my sister Charlotte wrote to you about the vacant millinery shop." Zara nodded, confused by his polite address. "She did. I was a seamstress in Denver before." She hesitated, unwilling to address the rumors directly. "Before you decided Willow Creek might benefit from your skills," Reed finished for her smoothly. He turned to face the onlookers, his voice carrying. "Miss Fairchild is opening a dress shop in the old Miller place. My sister has vouched for her talent with a needle. Anyone needing fine stitchwork would do well to support her business." The sheriff frowned, clearly torn between maintaining order and his own prejudices. "Lynch, you know what they're saying about her in Denver." Reed's jaw tightened. "I know what gossip is, Sheriff, and I know a hard-working woman when I see one." He looked back at Zara, his green eyes intense. "They've called you a fallen woman, haven't they?" The directness of his question startled her, but Zara refused to cower. "They have." Reed Lynch smiled then, not a full smile but a quirk of his lips that transformed his weathered face. He spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Then I'll be the man who lifts her." A shocked silence fell over the crowd. Zara herself couldn't believe what she'd heard. This stranger, this cowboy she'd never met before today, had just positioned himself as her defender in front of the entire town. "If you'll allow me, Miss Fairchild," Reed continued, extending his hand for her carpetbag, "I'd be pleased to escort you to your new shop. It's just down the way." Zara hesitated only briefly before handing him her bag. "Thank you, Mr. Lynch." As they walked away from the murmuring crowd, Zara kept her voice low. "You don't know me, sir. Your reputation will suffer. My reputation can handle it, he replied simply. And I know enough. Charlotte wouldn't have invited you here if you weren't worth knowing. Zara studied him as they walked. Reed Lynch was not what she would call handsome in the traditional sense. His nose had been broken at least once, and a thin scar traced his jaw, but his features held a rugged appeal that was undeniable. More than that, there was a steadiness to him that she found instantly comforting. Why would you do this for a stranger? She pressed. Reed slowed his pace, considering his words carefully. My mother was once in a position not unlike yours. Different circumstances, perhaps, but she faced the judgment of people who'd never walked in her shoes. His gaze was direct but gentle. She always said God gives second chances. It's people who are stingy with them. They arrived at a small storefront with large windows that would let in plenty of light, perfect for detailed sewing work. A sign hung above, Miller's Millinery, with closed painted beneath it in faded letters. Mrs. Miller passed last winter, Reed explained as he set down her bag and fished a key from his pocket. No family to speak of. Charlotte thought it was a shame to see a good shop go to waste, especially when so many of the ladies have to travel all the way to Pueblo for decent dressmaking. He unlocked the door and pushed it open, standing aside to let Zara enter first. The interior was dusty but well appointed, with shelving along the walls and a large cutting table in the center. A narrow staircase led to what she assumed was living quarters above. It's perfect, she breathed, already envisioning how she would arrange things. Reed leaned against the doorframe. Charlotte left some supplies upstairs, said you'd written that you were bringing your own sewing machine. Yes, it should arrive on tomorrow's stage. Zara ran her fingers along the edge of the cutting table. Mr. Lynch, I don't know how to thank you. Reed, he corrected. And there's no need. Just make this shop a success, that'll be thanks enough. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they could see a group of women gathered, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. At their center stood an elegantly dressed woman with silver-threaded dark hair, her posture rigid with disapproval. Mrs. Holcomb, Reed sighed. Town busybody and self-appointed moral guardian. The bell above the door jingled as Mrs. Holcomb entered without invitation, her gaze sweeping critically over the shop before landing on Zara. So it's true, she said coldly. Willow Creek is to be blessed with a modiste from Denver, Mrs. Holcomb, Reed acknowledged with a nod that held little warmth. Miss Fairchild is indeed opening a dress shop with my family's endorsement. Yes, well, your family's judgment has been questionable before, the woman sniffed. Miss Fairchild, I feel it only fair to inform you that Willow Creek is a God-fearing community. We value propriety and good character. Zara straightened her spine. As do I, Mrs. Holcomb. You'll find my work to be of the highest quality and my conduct beyond reproach. Your conduct is precisely what concerns us, the older woman replied. We've heard about your previous occupation. Reed stepped forward. Mrs. Holcomb, whatever Miss Fairchild did before coming to Willow Creek is her own business. It becomes our business when it threatens the moral fabric of our community, Mrs. Holcomb insisted. A woman who has lived as she has cannot simply reinvent herself and expect decent folk to pretend not to notice. Zara felt her cheeks burn with shame and anger, but she held her ground. I'm not pretending anything, Mrs. Holcomb. Yes, I worked in a house in Denver. I was a seamstress there, creating gowns for the ladies of the establishment. A half-truth, but not entirely a lie. She had indeed sewn many of the elaborate costumes worn by the women of Madame Rosalind's, even while she herself entertained gentlemen callers when times were lean and Madame insisted. Is that what they're calling it these days? Mrs. Holcomb scoffed. That's enough. Reed's voice was quiet, but carried an edge that silenced the older woman. Miss Fairchild has Charlotte's recommendation and my support, unless you'd care to take that up with the Lynch family directly. Mrs. Holcomb blanched slightly. The Lynch name clearly carried weight in Willow Creek. Very well, she said stiffly. But make no mistake, Miss Fairchild, this town will be watching you. With that, she turned on her heel and swept out, the bell jangling angrily in her wake. When she was gone, Zara released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. I'm afraid I've brought trouble to your doorstep, Mr. Lynch. Reed, he corrected again, a ghost of a smile playing at his lips, and Trouble and I are old acquaintances. He moved to the window, watching as Mrs. Holcomb gathered her followers and departed. Don't let her bother you. Her bark is worse than her bite. I've encountered her kind before, Zara said, removing her bonnet and placing it on the counter. The world is full of Mrs. Holcombs. Reed turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. You know, my sister will want to meet you properly. Would you consider joining us for supper tonight? Our ranch is just a few miles outside town. Zara hesitated. That's very kind, but I should get settled here. And honestly, I'm not sure your family would want to associate with me too closely. My family forms their own opinions about people, Reed assured her. Besides, Charlotte's the one who invited you here in the first place. She'd be mighty disappointed if I didn't bring you around. There was something about his earnestness that made it hard to refuse. Very well. Supper would be lovely. I'll come by at 6 to fetch you, Reed said, moving toward the door. He paused with his hand on the latch. Miss Fairchild. Yes, his eyes, warm and sincere, met hers. Welcome to Willow Creek. After he left, Zara stood in the center of her new shop, taking it all in. For the first time in years, she felt something dangerously close to hope fluttering in her chest. She had come to Willow Creek, seeking a fresh start, never expecting to find an ally so quickly, especially not one as unexpected as Reed Lynch. She climbed the narrow stairs to explore her living quarters, a modest but clean space with a bedroom, small sitting area, and a kitchen nook with a cast-iron stove. Charlotte Lynch had indeed left supplies, fresh linens, pantry staples, and even a few dress patterns. On the small table was a note in flowing script. Welcome to Willow Creek. May you find here what you're seeking, Charlotte Lynch. Zara sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the kindness of strangers after so many years of hard lessons about human nature. She wouldn't cry, she decided. This was a beginning, not an ending. She unpacked her carpet bag, arranging her few personal belongings around the room. From the bottom, wrapped in a shawl, she withdrew her most precious possession, a daguerreotype of herself as a child with her parents, taken before the consumption took them both and left her an orphan at 12. Their faces, frozen in time, smiled back at her from the silver surface. I'm trying, Mama, she whispered to the image. I'm trying to be the woman you raised me to be. Setting the picture on the bedside table, Zara went to the small washstand and began to clean up for supper with the Lynches. She had few illusions about her situation. One man's kindness couldn't erase years of gossip and suspicion. But for tonight, at least, she would allow herself to hope that Willow Creek might eventually become more than just another place to hide from her past. When Reed returned at 6 o'clock, Zara was waiting. She had changed into her best dress, a sage green cotton with modest lace trim that she'd sewn herself, and pinned her honey brown hair into a simple but elegant knot. Reed's eyes widened slightly when she opened the door. Miss Fairchild, he said, removing his hat. You look lovely. Thank you, she replied, feeling a blush creep up her neck. And please call me Zara. He smiled fully then, a genuine expression that transformed his face and made him look younger than his weathered appearance suggested. Zara it is then. He helped her up into his wagon, a well-maintained vehicle with a team of matched bay horses that spoke of prosperity without ostentation. As they pulled away from town, Zara found herself relaxing for the first time that day. Your horses are beautiful, she commented, admiring their glossy coats. Raised them from colts, Reed said with obvious pride. The Lynch Ranch specializes in horseflesh. We supply mounts for the Army, the stage company, and private buyers throughout the territory. That explains your sister's connection to Denver, Zara observed. I met Charlotte at Madame Rosalind's when she came to deliver a mare. Reed's eyebrows rose slightly. Charlotte didn't mention that part. She was kind, Zara continued carefully. She saw me mending one of the girls' costumes. We got to talking about sewing, and she mentioned Willow Creek needed a dressmaker. Zara twisted her hands in her lap. I never expected her to actually write to me with an offer. That's Charlotte for you. When she sees something that needs doing, she does it. Reed glanced sideways at her. She has good instincts about people. The implication that Charlotte, and by extension, Reed, had seen something worthwhile in her maid Zara's throat tightened unexpectedly. She gazed out at the landscape to hide her emotion. The rugged beauty of Colorado spread around them, with the Spanish peaks rising majestically in the distance, and the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the rolling grasslands. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. "Different from Denver," Reed acknowledged. "Quieter, slower. Some folks find it too quiet." After the last few years, quiet sounds perfect. Reed nodded, seeming to understand all she wasn't saying. They rode in comfortable silence for a while before he pointed ahead to where a cluster of buildings came into view. "Lynch Ranch. Been in the family since my father claimed it in '53. Pa passed 5 years ago, but Ma still runs things with an iron hand, along with me, Charlotte, and my younger brother Benjamin." The main house was a substantial 2-story structure built of sturdy logs and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Several outbuildings dotted the property, including a large barn, bunkhouse, and what appeared to be a blacksmith's forge. In corrals nearby, horses of various colors grazed peacefully. As they pulled up to the house, a woman emerged onto the porch. Even from a distance, Zara could see the family resemblance to Reed, the same russet hair, though hers was streaked with silver and a similar tall, lean build. "That's Ma," Reed said, bringing the wagon to a stop. "Prepare yourself. She doesn't believe in holding back her opinions." "I've faced worse than straightforward talk," Zara assured him. Reed jumped down and came around to help her descend from the wagon. As her feet touched the ground, the front door opened again and a young woman hurried out, her face alight with excitement. "You must be Miss Fairchild," she called, rushing forward. This would be Charlotte, Zara realized younger than Reed by several years, with the same coloring but softer features. She wore practical riding clothes rather than a dress, marking her as a woman who valued function over fashion. "Please call me Zara," she replied, extending her hand. Charlotte ignored the hand and pulled her into a warm embrace instead. "I'm so glad you came. I was afraid you might not accept my invitation after all." "Charlotte," the older woman Mrs. Lynch admonished gently. "Let the poor woman breathe." Charlotte released Zara with a laugh. "Sorry, Ma says I'm like a puppy, too enthusiastic for my own good." "It's quite all right," Zara assured her, smoothing her dress self-consciously. She turned to the matriarch. "Mrs. Lynch, thank you for having me in your home." Eliza Lynch studied Zara with keen eyes that missed nothing. She was a handsome woman despite the hardships etched into her face, with the bearing of someone who had weathered many storms and expected to weather many more. "So you're the dressmaker Charlotte's been going on about," she said finally, her tone neutral. "Come inside. Supper's nearly ready, and you can tell me about your plans for the miller's shop." The interior of the Lynch home was comfortable and well-appointed without being ostentatious. The main room featured a large stone fireplace, sturdy furniture crafted by skilled hands, and small touches that made it feel like a home rather than just a house. Handmade quilts draped over chairs, shelves lined with books, and family daguerreotypes displayed prominently. A young man rose from an armchair as they entered. He was perhaps 20, with the Lynch family features but a slighter build than Reed. "Benjamin," Reed said. "This is Miss Zara Fairchild. Zara, my brother Benjamin." "A pleasure, Miss Fairchild," Benjamin said, bowing slightly. His eyes, Zara noticed, held a hint of mischief that his formal greeting belied. "Ben's our scholar," Charlotte explained. "Heading off to college back east in the fall." "Colorado School of Mines," Benjamin corrected. "Hardly back east." "Still too far for Ma's liking," Reed said, clapping his brother on the shoulder. Mrs. Lynch sniffed. "A mother's entitled to want her children nearby, especially her youngest." She gestured toward the dining room. "Sit, everyone, the food's getting cold." The dining table was laden with a hearty meal: roast beef, potatoes, fresh baked bread, and vegetables from what was clearly a well-tended garden. As they took their seats, Zara noticed a sixth-place setting. "Are we expecting someone else?" she asked. "That would be me," came a deep voice from the doorway. Zara turned to see a tall man with graying hair and a dignified bearing entering the room. He wore the collar of a clergyman. "Reverend Martin," Reed said, rising to shake the man's hand. "Glad you could join us." Zara felt her heart sink. Was this an ambush, a Christian intervention for the fallen woman? Mrs. Lynch must have read her expression. The Reverend joins us for supper most Wednesdays, she explained. It's tradition, not a special occasion. Reverend Martin took the seat beside Zara, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled at her. You must be Miss Fairchild. Charlotte mentioned you'd be opening the Miller shop. Yes, Reverend, Zara replied cautiously. Excellent news, he said, unfolding his napkin. This town has needed a skilled seamstress since Agnes Miller passed. My wife has been lamenting having to travel to Pueblo for decent dressmaking. As Mrs. Lynch said grace, Zara kept her eyes downcast, acutely aware of the Reverend beside her. When the prayer ended, dishes began to be passed around, and conversation flowed naturally among the family members. How was Denver, Miss Fairchild? Benjamin asked, helping himself to potatoes. I've only visited once and found it rather overwhelming. It's grown considerably in recent years, Zara replied carefully. With the railroad and the silver boom, it's become quite cosmopolitan. Too cosmopolitan for some tastes, Mrs. Lynch commented. I prefer the simplicity of country living. Charlotte rolled her eyes good-naturedly. Ma hasn't forgiven Denver since a shopkeeper tried to charge her double for calico. It wasn't the money, Mrs. Lynch protested. It was the principle. He thought because I came from a ranch, I didn't know fair pricing. Ma rode 20 miles to the next town rather than pay his price, Reed explained to Zara. Then wrote to every rancher's wife in the county to warn them about the shop. The man was out of business within 6 months, Mrs. Lynch said with satisfaction. Reverend Martin chuckled. Eliza Lynch is not a woman to be trifled with, Miss Fairchild. A valuable lesson for anyone new to our community. Zara smiled despite her nervousness. There was something refreshing about Mrs. Lynch's straightforwardness. Charlotte tells me you're quite talented with a needle, Mrs. Lynch said, her keen eyes assessing Zara. She was quite impressed with your work. Zara glanced at Charlotte gratefully. I've been sewing since I was a child. My mother taught me before she passed. And that dress, Charlotte added, Zara made it herself. Isn't the stitching exquisite, Ma? Mrs. Lynch nodded approvingly. Fine work indeed. The conversation continued pleasantly through the meal, touching on local news, ranch business, and Benjamin's upcoming studies. No one mentioned Denver again or asked probing questions about Zara's past. By the time dessert fresh berry pie was served, Zara found herself relaxing into the warm family dynamic. After the meal, Charlotte insisted on showing Zara the horses, leaving Reed, Benjamin, and Reverend Martin to help Mrs. Lynch clear the table. I can't believe you actually came, Charlotte said as they walked toward the corrals. When Reed rode out this morning to meet the stage, I warned him you might have changed your mind. I nearly did, Zara admitted, many times, but your letter came at precisely the right moment. She hesitated, then added quietly, Madame Rosalind was closing her establishment. I needed somewhere to go. Charlotte nodded understandingly. Life has a way of closing doors and opening windows at the same time. She leaned against the corral fence, watching a dappled mare graze nearby. Reed said Mrs. Holcomb gave you a hard time today, Zara sighed. I expected as much. Gossip travels faster than stagecoaches. Mrs. Holcomb would find fault with the angel Gabriel if he descended into Willow Creek, Charlotte scoffed. Don't let her worry you. Most folks around here are decent once they get to know you. They'll judge you by your actions, not rumors. Your brother was very kind, Zara said. He didn't have to defend me the way he did. Charlotte smiled knowingly. Reed has always had a soft spot for underdogs. Ever since we were children, he was the one bringing home injured animals and standing up for anyone being treated unfairly. She glanced back toward the house. He's the best man I know, Zara. Stubborn as a mule sometimes, but true as steel. Before Zara could respond, the subject of their conversation appeared at the corral gate. Ma's serving coffee on the porch, Reed called, and she doesn't like to be kept waiting. As they walked back, Reed fell into step beside Zara. I hope Charlotte wasn't talking your ear off about horseflesh. She can go on for hours about bloodlines and conformation. Actually, we were talking about you, Charlotte said mischievously. Reed groaned. Lord preserve me. Whatever she told you, it's likely exaggerated. Only the good parts, Charlotte assured him with a wink before skipping ahead to join the others on the porch. Your family is lovely, Zara said softly. Thank you for including me tonight. Reed's eyes were warm in the fading light. They like you. Even Ma, though she'd never admit it so quickly. And the Reverend, was his presence truly a coincidence? Reed hesitated. Not entirely. I might have mentioned to Ma that you were facing some prejudice in town. She suggested having Martin join us might help establish your respectability. Zara stopped walking. So this was a calculated move to improve my standing, in part, Reed admitted. But also because we genuinely wanted you to feel welcome. He gazed down at her earnestly. Is that so terrible? Zara considered this. Throughout her life, people's motives for helping her had rarely been pure. There was always a price, an expectation, a debt to be paid, but the Lynches seemed different. No, she finally said. It's not terrible, it's actually quite thoughtful. Relief crossed Reed's features. Good. Because I have a feeling Willow Creek is about to get the finest dressmaker in the Colorado Territory, and my family aims to be first in line for your services. The remainder of the evening passed pleasantly, with coffee and conversation on the porch as the sun set over the Spanish Peaks. When it was time to leave, the entire Lynch family and Reverend Martin saw Zara to Reed's wagon. You'll come for Sunday service, I hope, the Reverend said as he helped her up. Zara hadn't been to church in years, but she found herself nodding. I'd be honored, Reverend. And stop by the ranch anytime, Charlotte added. I meant what I wrote about helping you get settled. Mrs. Lynch stepped forward last. Miss Fairchild, she said formally, my daughter has good judgment about people. I trust you won't disappoint her faith in you. It was both a blessing and a warning, Zara realized. I'll do my very best not to, Mrs. Lynch. The ride back to town was quieter than the journey out had been. The night was clear, with stars spreading across the velvet sky in a display city dwellers rarely witnessed. Reed handled the team confidently even in the darkness, occasionally pointing out landmarks barely visible in the moonlight. Your mother is formidable, Zara observed after a comfortable silence. Reed chuckled. That she is. Raised 3 children and ran a ranch after Pa died, never once showing weakness even when I know she was breaking inside. He glanced at Zara. She had to be strong. The territory wasn't kind to widows. Or to women in general, Zara added softly. Reed nodded, understanding in his eyes. Life gives some folks harder paths than others. The trick is to keep walking forward regardless. They reached the edge of town, the streets quiet at this hour with only the saloon showing signs of life. As they pulled up in front of her shop, Zara felt a strange reluctance to see the evening end. Reed helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a moment, they stood close enough that she could detect the scent of leather and pine that clung to him. Thank you for tonight, she said, stepping back slightly. For everything. I'll check on you tomorrow, Reed promised. Your sewing machine should arrive on the morning stage. You don't need to trouble yourself, Zara protested. I'm sure you have ranch business, it's no trouble, he interrupted gently. Besides, I need to order some supplies anyway. Zara knew it for the excuse it was but didn't challenge him. Then I'll see you tomorrow. Reed watched as she unlocked the shop door. Good night, Zara. Good night, Reed. Inside, Zara leaned against the closed door, listening to the sounds of his wagon moving away. She felt lightheaded, but not from fatigue. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt the fragile stirring of possibility not just for a new business, but for a new life altogether. She climbed the stairs to her small apartment and readied herself for bed, her mind still processing the events of the day. When she finally slipped between the cool sheets, her last thoughts before drifting off were of a tall cowboy with kind eyes who had defended her honor without knowing if she deserved his defense. Then, I'll be the man who lifts her, he had said. Zara fell asleep wondering what it might be like to be lifted instead of falling. The next morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the windows Zara had cleaned the night before. She rose early, eager to begin making her shop presentable. A quick inventory of the space revealed that while Mrs. Miller had taken her personal effects, she'd left behind most of the business fixtures' dress forms, a cutting table, shelving, and even some basic supplies like pins, needles, and measuring tapes. Zara swept the floors and wiped down every surface, her mind already planning the layout. The front of the shop would showcase finished garments and fabric samples, while the back would serve as her workroom. She found an old ledger in a drawer and began making lists of supplies she would need to order. A knock at the door interrupted her work. She opened it to find a young boy of perhaps 12 standing there, cap in hand. "Miss Fairchild," he asked. "Ma sent these over. Said you might be wanting breakfast." He held out a covered basket that, when opened, revealed still warm biscuits, preserves, and a small crock of butter. "That's very kind," Zara said, surprised. "Who is your mother?" "Sarah Jenkins, madam. We run the general store 2 doors down," he pointed. "Ma says to come by when you're settled. She needs some new aprons made, and Emmy, that's my sister, she's getting married in the fall and needs a dress." Zara blinked in surprise. "Please thank your mother for me. Tell her I'll stop by this afternoon." The boy nodded and dashed off, leaving Zara staring after him in wonder. It seemed not everyone in Willow Creek shared Mrs. Holcomb's opinion. She had just finished her improvised breakfast when the sound of the stage arriving drew her attention. Donning her bonnet, she stepped outside to see the coach pulling up to the Wells Fargo office across the street. Sure enough, her Singer sewing machine was among the cargo being unloaded. As she crossed to claim it, she spotted Reed Lynch riding into town. He dismounted in front of the stage office just as she arrived. "Good morning," he called, tipping his hat. "I see your machine made it safely." "It did." Zara smiled, genuinely pleased to see him. "You didn't have to come all this way just for this." "I told you I needed supplies," Reed reminded her, though his eyes twinkled with amusement at her skepticism. He turned to the stage driver. "Bill, I'll help Miss Fairchild get her machine to her shop." Between the two of them, they managed to carry the heavy iron machine across the street and into her shop. Reed positioned it near the window where the light was best. "This is quite the modern contraption," he commented, examining the gleaming black machine with its gold detailing. "Must have cost a pretty penny." Zara ran her hand over the familiar curves of the Singer. "It was my first major purchase when I started working in Denver, paid for itself many times over." Reed seemed about to say something more when the shop door opened again. A tall, distinguished man in a fine suit entered, followed by a woman who was clearly his wife and a young lady of about 18 who bore a striking resemblance to them both. "Judge Parker," Reed greeted, extending his hand. "Mrs. Parker, Miss Amelia, good morning to you all." "Lynch," the judge acknowledged with a nod before turning his attention to Zara. "Miss Fairchild, I presume. I'm Judge Edward Parker. This is my wife, Victoria, and our daughter, Amelia." Zara curtsied slightly. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs." Parker stepped forward, her assessment of Zara quick but thorough. "Miss Fairchild, we understand you're a dressmaker of some skill. Our Amelia is to attend a summer ball in Denver next month, and she requires something special." "Mother," the girl Amelia protested softly, her cheeks pink with embarrassment. "Nonsense, dear. If Miss Fairchild is as skilled as Charlotte Lynch claims, we should secure her services before her calendar fills." Mrs. Parker turned back to Zara. "Assuming, of course, that you're accepting commissions." Zara's heart leapt. A commission from the judge's family would go a long way toward establishing her legitimacy in town. "I would be honored, Mrs. Parker, though I should warn you my shop isn't quite ready for business yet." "Preparations going well?" the judge inquired, glancing around the space. "Yes, sir. I hope to open officially next week once I've received my fabric orders." Mrs. Parker nodded approvingly. "Well, we needn't wait for an official opening. Perhaps we could schedule a fitting for tomorrow." "Say 10 o'clock. That would be perfect," Zara agreed. "I have some design sketches I could show Miss Amelia." After a few more pleasantries, the Parkers departed, promising to return the next day. When they were gone, Zara turned to Reed in amazement, the judge's daughter. "That's quite a first commission." Reed looked pleased. "The Parkers are influential in Willow Creek. Victoria Parker particularly, she runs the Ladies' Charitable Society and is something of a tastemaker. If she approves of your work, others will follow. Did you arrange this?" Zara asked suspiciously. Reed held up his hands. "Not directly, though I might have mentioned to Charlotte that you were opening shop, and Charlotte might have mentioned it to Mrs. Parker at church on Sunday." Zara shook her head, but she was smiling. You Lynches are a formidable force when you decide to champion someone. We believe in giving folks a fair chance, Reed said simply. He glanced at the clock on the wall. I should let you get back to work. I have those supplies to fetch, of course. But neither of them moved immediately. There was a moment of awkward silence before Reed cleared his throat. Would you consider having supper with me tonight, just the two of us? He added quickly. There's a decent restaurant at the hotel. Zara hesitated. Dining publicly with Reed would certainly set tongues wagging even more than they already were, yet the thought of refusing him didn't sit right either. I would like that, she said finally. What time? 6. I'll come by to escort you. After Reed left, Zara found herself humming as she continued organizing her shop. By mid-afternoon, she had arranged the front display area attractively and set up her workstation in the back. She visited Mrs. Jenkins at the general store as promised and came away with orders for 3 aprons and the promise to design a wedding gown for Emmy Jenkins. Word seemed to spread quickly. By closing time, 3 more women had stopped by to inquire about dressmaking services. None were as prominent as the Parkers, but each represented potential income and, more importantly, acceptance. As 6 o'clock approached, Zara found herself paying extra attention to her appearance. She chose a blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes and arranged her hair in a more elaborate style than she had worn the previous evening. Reed arrived precisely at 6, freshly shaven and wearing a clean shirt and string tie with his usual denim and leather. He'd left his work hat behind in favor of a less weathered Stetson. You look beautiful, he said when she opened the door. Zara felt herself blush like a schoolgirl. Thank you. You clean up rather nicely yourself. The restaurant at the Willow Creek Hotel was modest but respectable, with white tablecloths and a small vase of fresh flowers on each table. Several diners looked up as Reed and Zara entered, their expressions ranging from curious to disapproving. Reed ignored them all, leading Zara to a table near the window. I apologize for the attention, he said quietly as he held her chair. Small towns and their gossip. I'm used to being the subject of conversation, Zara replied, though in truth, the scrutiny still stung. Though usually people are less obvious about their staring, Reed ordered for them both the special, a beef stew with fresh bread and a bottle of wine that raised Zara's eyebrows. A special occasion, she asked as the waiter poured. New beginnings deserve celebration, Reed replied, raising his glass. To fresh starts. Zara clinked her glass against his. To fresh starts. As they ate, their conversation flowed easily. Reed told her about growing up on the ranch, about his father's dreams for the land and how the family had struggled after his death. Ma could have sold out, he explained, had offers, good ones too, but she was determined to hold on to Pa's legacy for us kids. She's remarkable, Zara said sincerely. She is, though she can be stubborn as a mule when she sets her mind to something. Reed smiled fondly. What about you? You mentioned your parents passed when you were young, Zara nodded, sipping her wine, when I was 12. Consumption took them both within months of each other. I had no other family, so I went to live with a woman who had been my mother's friend, Mrs. Winters. She ran a boarding house in St. Louis. That must have been difficult, losing everything at once. It was, Zara acknowledged, but Mrs. Winters was kind in her way. She taught me practical skills, cooking, cleaning, household management, and she encouraged my sewing. Said a woman with a marketable skill would never starve. Wise advice, Reed commented. How did you end up in Denver? This was treading into dangerous territory. Zara hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. Mrs. Winters passed when I was 19. The boarding house went to her son, who had different ideas about how I might contribute to the household. Understanding darkened Reed's eyes. So you left. With nothing but the clothes on my back and my sewing kit, Zara confirmed. I had heard Denver was a place where a woman might make her own way. When I arrived, I found work where I could. Eventually, that led me to Madame Rosalind's. She held her breath, waiting for judgment to cloud his expression, but it never came. And now to Willow Creek, Reed said softly. Quite a journey. Yes, Zara agreed, relieved at his acceptance, though I never expected to end up in a place like this. I always imagined I'd stay in the city, anonymous among the crowds. Do you regret coming here? She considered the question honestly. No, despite Mrs. Holcomb and the whispers, I think there might be a place for me here if people will give me a chance. They will, Reed assured her. Some faster than others, but they will. After dinner, Reed walked her back to her shop. The night was cool, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine from the nearby mountains. Stars glittered overhead, clearer than any Zara had seen in Denver. At her door, Reed hesitated. I've enjoyed this evening, Zara, very much. As have I, she admitted. He took her hand, his touch gentle. May I call on you again? The question was formal, old-fashioned even, but Zara understood its significance. Reed Lynch wasn't proposing a casual dalliance or a secret arrangement. He was asking to court her properly, openly. People will talk, she warned. Your reputation, let them talk, he interrupted. My reputation can withstand gossip. The question is, can yours stand being associated with a rough cowboy? The teasing light in his eyes made her laugh. I believe I'll risk it, Mr. Lynch. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent a shiver up her arm. Good night, Miss Fairchild. I'll see you soon. Zara watched him walk away, a tall figure silhouetted against the night sky. Only when he had disappeared from view did she unlock her door and slip inside, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched it. The next several days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Zara's fabric orders arrived from Denver, filling her shop with bolts of cotton, wool, silk, and lace in a rainbow of colors. The Parkers' appointment went exceptionally well, with Amelia selecting an elegant design for her ball gown and Mrs. Parker commissioning 2-day dresses for herself. Word of the Parkers' patronage spread quickly. By the end of the week, Zara had appointments booked with several prominent families and a stack of orders for everyday items like shirts, aprons, and children's clothing. Reed visited daily, sometimes bringing small gifts, fresh eggs from the ranch chickens, wildflowers he'd gathered on the ride to town, or books from his family's library that he thought she might enjoy. Each visit strengthened the connection growing between them, a bond built on mutual respect and genuine affection. On Sunday morning, Zara dressed with particular care for church services. She chose a modest lavender dress with a high collar and long sleeves, appropriate for worship, but still flattering. She had promised Reed she would attend, though the prospect of facing the entire town in such a public setting filled her with trepidation. Reed arrived to escort her, looking handsome in his Sunday best, a dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and made him look more the successful rancher than the working cowboy. Ready? He asked, offering his arm. Zara took a deep breath. As I'll ever be. The church was a white clapboard building with a small steeple, simple but well-maintained. As they approached, Zara could see parishioners gathering outside, talking in small groups before the service. Several conversations halted abruptly as she and Reed came into view. Ignore them, Reed murmured, patting her hand where it rested on his arm. Charlotte spotted them and hurried over, her face brightening. You came. Ma saved seats for us in the Lynch pew. She led them inside, past the curious stares and whispered comments to where Mrs. Lynch sat rigidly upright in a pew about halfway down the center aisle. Benjamin sat beside her and nodded a greeting as they joined them. Miss Fairchild, Mrs. Lynch acknowledged with a small nod. I'm pleased you decided to attend services. Thank you for saving me a seat, Zara replied quietly. More townspeople filtered in, many casting glances in their direction. Zara recognized several of her new customers among them, including Mrs. Jenkins, who offered a friendly wave. The Parkers entered last, taking their prominent position in the front pew. Reverend Martin's service was thoughtful and mercifully free of fire and brimstone condemnation. His sermon focused on the parable of the lost sheep, emphasizing God's joy in finding those who had strayed from the fold. Zara couldn't help wondering if the topic had been chosen with her in mind. But the Reverend's kind eyes and gentle delivery contained no accusation. After the final hymn, there was a moment Zara had been dreading, the social time when congregants mingled before dispersing to their Sunday dinners. She considered slipping out quietly, but Reed's hand on hers kept her in place. Best to face them directly, he said, as if reading her thoughts. Running only gives gossips more to speculate about. He was right, of course. So Zara held her head high as they made their way out of the pew and toward the church steps. Charlotte flanked her other side, with Mrs. Lynch and Benjamin following. Outside, several women approached immediately, led by Mrs. Parker. "Miss Fairchild, what a lovely dress," the judge's wife commented. "Your own work, I presume?" "Yes, madam," Zara confirmed. "Ladies," Mrs. Parker addressed the group, "Miss Fairchild has been kind enough to take on Amelia's ball gown despite her shop barely being open. I've seen her sketches and can attest to her skill." This endorsement from Mrs. Parker seemed to break the ice. Several women stepped forward to introduce themselves and inquire about dressmaking services. Zara found herself engaged in pleasant conversation about fabrics and fashions, the whispers about her past temporarily set aside in favor of more immediate interests. Not everyone was won over, of course. Mrs. Holcomb stood at the edge of the churchyard with several like-minded women, their disapproving stares making it clear that Zara's presence was unwelcome in their eyes. But they were, Zara noted with relief, in the minority. Reed stayed by her side throughout, his presence both protective and proudly proprietary. When Mrs. Lynch announced that Miss Fairchild would be joining them for Sunday dinner, it was said loudly enough for nearby congregants to hear a public declaration of the Lynch family's support. The Sunday dinner at the Lynch Ranch was more formal than the previous supper Zara had shared with them, with the good china brought out and a tablecloth covering the sturdy oak table. The conversation was lively, focused largely on ranch business and local affairs. Benjamin entertained them with stories about his preparations for college, while Charlotte discussed a new breeding program she was developing for their horses. After the meal, Charlotte insisted on showing Zara her latest sewing project, a riding habit she was struggling to complete. "I'm handy with leather and rough work," she explained as they examined the half-finished garment in her bedroom, "but delicate stitching defeats me every time." "It's not bad," Zara assured her, examining the seams, "but I could show you a few techniques that might help." As she demonstrated a particular stitch, Zara became aware that Charlotte was watching her with an oddly serious expression. "Is something wrong?" Zara asked. Charlotte shook her head. "Just thinking, Reed seems different since you arrived. Different how? Happier, more at peace." Charlotte set down her sewing. "Our father's death hit Reed harder than any of us. He took on Pa's responsibilities overnight, determined to keep the ranch going for Ma's sake. For years, he's done nothing but work from dawn till dusk." She smiled softly. "This past week is the first time I can remember him riding into town without a list of business to conduct." Zara felt her cheeks warm. "I'm sure the ranch keeps him busy enough." "Oh, it does," Charlotte agreed. "Which makes it all the more remarkable that he finds so much time to visit your shop." She leaned forward, her expression earnest. "He likes you, Zara. More than likes you, I suspect, and I haven't seen him take an interest in any woman since Mary Sutton broke his heart 5 years ago." "Mary Sutton?" Zara couldn't help asking. They were engaged briefly. She decided she preferred city life to becoming a rancher's wife and left for San Francisco. Charlotte shrugged. "It was for the best. They weren't well suited, but it left Reed wary." The information gave Zara pause. Reed had been nothing but kind and supportive since her arrival, but she hadn't allowed herself to think too deeply about his motivations or what might develop between them. Her own past made any future relationship complicated, to say the least. "Charlotte," she began carefully, "you know that the rumors about me, they're not entirely unfounded." Charlotte nodded. "I suspected as much. Denver can be a hard place for a woman alone." "There are things in my past that would shock proper society," Zara continued. "Things that would make me an unsuitable match for someone like your brother." "My brother is a grown man who makes his own decisions," Charlotte replied firmly. "And as for shocking proper society," she grinned suddenly, "you should hear the story of how our parents met sometime. Ma was a saloon singer in Leadville when Pa found her." Zara's eyes widened. "Mrs. Lynch, a saloon singer? Hard to imagine now, isn't it? She reinvented herself as the perfect rancher's wife. Most folks who know her today have no idea of her past." Charlotte patted Zara's hand. The West is full of second chances, Zara, for those brave enough to take them. When they rejoined the others downstairs, Zara found herself seeing Mrs. Lynch in a new light. The dignified matriarch showed no traces of her saloon days, yet Zara could now detect a steeliness beneath her proper exterior that spoke of a woman who had fought for her place in the world. As the afternoon waned, Reed offered to drive Zara back to town. The ride was pleasant, with Reed pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area's history. When they reached her shop, he helped her down from the wagon but kept hold of her hand after her feet touched the ground. "Zara," he said, his voice lower than usual, "there's a town social next Saturday, a dance to celebrate Founders' Day. Would you accompany me?" A public dance was an even more significant statement than church or dinner. It was a declaration of serious intentions that no one in town could misinterpret. "Are you certain?" she asked. "Everyone will be there." "That's rather the point," Reed said with a small smile. "I'd like everyone to see us together." "Unless," he added quickly, "you'd rather not be seen with me so publicly." "It's not that," Zara assured him. "I just don't want to cause problems for you or your family." Reed's expression softened. "You've been worried about my reputation since the day we met. I think it's time you understood something." He stepped closer, still holding her hand. "I'm not ashamed to be seen with you, Zara Fairchild. Quite the opposite. I'm proud to walk beside you, to be the man fortunate enough to escort you." His sincerity was unmistakable, written in the lines of his face and the warmth of his eyes. Zara felt something shift inside her, a wall beginning to crumble, a fear beginning to fade. "Then yes," she said, "I would be honored to attend the social with you." Reed's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Good, that's good." He hesitated, then leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Zara didn't pull away. His lips met hers in a gentle kiss that lasted only a moment but left her breathless nonetheless. When he drew back, his eyes searched hers, looking for any sign of regret. "I've wanted to do that since I first saw you standing in the street," he admitted. "Even knowing what they said about me, especially knowing what they said," Reed corrected. "Because I saw the courage it took for you to walk down that street with your head held high, despite the whispers." He kissed her once more, briefly, before reluctantly stepping back. "I should go, but I'll see you tomorrow," Zara nodded, not trusting her voice. She watched him drive away, her fingers touching her lips where his had been moments before. Inside her shop, she moved about her evening routine in a daze, her mind replaying the day's events: church, dinner with the Lynches, Charlotte's revelations about her mother, and finally, Reed's kiss. It was like a dream, this new life that was unfolding before her. A beautiful, fragile dream that she scarcely dared believe could be real. As she prepared for bed, Zara found herself standing before the small mirror in her bedroom, studying her reflection. The woman who looked back at her was both familiar and strange, the same features she had always known, but somehow transformed. There was a lightness in her eyes that hadn't been there in Denver, a softness around her mouth that spoke of emerging happiness. "Is this really happening?" She whispered to her reflection. "Could I actually belong here?" There was no answer, of course. But as she blew out her lamp and settled beneath the covers, Zara allowed herself, for the first time in years, to hope without reservation. The week leading up to the Founders' Day social was the busiest Zara had experienced since arriving in Willow Creek. Word of her skill with a needle had spread throughout the community, bringing a steady stream of customers to her shop. She worked long hours to fulfill orders, often sewing by lamplight well into the evening. Reed visited daily, sometimes bringing lunch or dinner when he suspected she was too busy to stop and eat properly. He never stayed long during business hours, respectful of her work, but his brief visits became the highlights of Zara's days. On Thursday afternoon, as Zara was finishing a fitting with Mrs. Jenkins' daughter Emmy, the shop bell jangled and Mrs. Holcomb entered, followed by a younger woman Zara recognized as her daughter, Beatrice, Zara's hands stilled on the pins she was placing in Emmy's wedding gown. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Holcomb. Miss Holcomb, I'll be with you in just a moment." Mrs. Holcomb sniffed disapprovingly but nodded, while Beatrice looked around the shop with undisguised curiosity. "Emmy," sensing tension, hurried through the remainder of her fitting and departed with promises to return the following week. Once they were alone, Zara turned to her unexpected visitors with a professional smile. "How may I help you ladies today?" Mrs. Holcomb drew herself up rigidly. "Miss Fairchild, it seems my daughter requires a new dress for the Founders' Day social. Apparently, you are the only dressmaker available at such short notice." The admission clearly cost the older woman, but Zara maintained her composure. "I'd be happy to help. Did you have a particular style in mind, Miss Holcomb?" Beatrice, who appeared to be about 20, stepped forward eagerly. "I was hoping for something in blue, perhaps with lace trim. I saw the dress you made for Amelia Parker and thought it was beautiful." "Beatrice," her mother admonished, "this is to be a simple day dress, not an extravagance." "But mother, the social is special," Beatrice protested. "And Thomas Wilson will be there." Mrs. Holcomb's expression softened slightly at the mention of Thomas Wilson, whom Zara knew to be the son of the town's banker. "Very well. Something suitable for a social, but still modest and proper." Zara showed them several fabric samples and design sketches, surprised to find that once business was being discussed, Mrs. Holcomb's attitude became less hostile. The woman clearly had strong opinions about fashion and wasn't shy about expressing them, but her suggestions were actually quite sensible. By the time they left an hour later, Zara had measurements for both women misses. Holcomb having decided she too required a new dress and a commission that would pay handsomely. It wasn't quite acceptance, but it was progress. No sooner had the Holcombs departed than Charlotte Lynch burst through the door, her face alight with excitement. "Did I just see Margaret Holcomb leaving your shop?" she demanded. "Voluntarily," Zara laughed. "You did indeed. It seems Miss Beatrice requires a new dress for the social and I'm the only option available." "Well, that's a victory if ever I saw one," Charlotte declared. Margaret Holcomb putting aside her moral outrage for the sake of fashion. She perched on the edge of the cutting table. "Speaking of the social, have you decided what you're wearing?" "I hadn't given it much thought," Zara admitted. "I've been so busy with orders." Charlotte looked scandalized. "But you're going with Reed. You need something special." She hopped down from the table and began examining the bolts of fabric lining the walls. "This one," she said decisively, pulling out a length of deep emerald silk. "With your coloring, you'll look magnificent." "Charlotte, that's my most expensive fabric," Zara protested. "I was saving it for a special commission." "And what could be more special than your first public appearance as Reed's sweetheart?" Charlotte countered. "Besides, you deserve something beautiful after working so hard." Zara hesitated, running her fingers over the sumptuous material. It had been years since she'd made anything fine for herself, always focusing on practical garments that would last. "Reed loves you in blue," Charlotte continued casually, "but this green will make your eyes look like amber in the lamplight. He won't be able to look away." "Charlotte," Zara exclaimed, blushing. "We're not. That is, Reed and I are just courting," Charlotte suggested innocently. "Just seeing each other nearly every day. Just looking at each other like you're both starving and found a feast." Zara's blush deepened. "It's still very new," Charlotte's expression softened. "I know, and I know you both have reasons to be cautious. But Zara, I've never seen my brother look at anyone the way he looks at you, not even Mary." The mention of Reed's former fiancée made Zara's stomach tighten. "He told you about our conversation." "He didn't have to. I have eyes." Charlotte placed the green silk on the cutting table. "Make the dress, Zara. For yourself, if not for Reed. Show everyone in Willow Creek that you belong here just as much as they do." After Charlotte left, Zara stood looking at the emerald silk for a long time. Finally, she picked up her shears and began to cut. Saturday dawned clear and mild, a perfect day for the Founders' Day celebrations. The town was decorated with bunting and flags, and a platform had been erected in the town square for speeches and performances before the evening dance. Zara spent the morning completing her final orders, then closed the shop at noon to prepare for the social. She bathed carefully, washing her hair and pinning it up in an elegant style that left soft tendrils framing her face. The dress she had created was her finest work, the emerald silk draped perfectly, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs and tiny pearl buttons down the back. When Reed arrived to escort her, his reaction was everything Zara could have hoped for. He stood speechless in the doorway, his eyes widening as he took in the sight of her. "Zara," he finally managed, "you look. There aren't words." She smiled, pleased by his reaction. "Charlotte helped me choose the fabric." "Remind me to thank my sister," Reed said, offering his arm. "Though I suspect every man at the social will be cursing me tonight for having the most beautiful woman in Colorado on my arm." The town square was filled with people when they arrived. Children ran about playing games, food tables groaned under the weight of potluck contributions, and a small band was tuning up on the platform. Lanterns had been strung between trees, waiting to be lit when darkness fell. Zara was acutely aware of the eyes that turned their way as she and Reed moved through the crowd. But to her surprise, the reactions were less hostile than she had feared. Many people nodded greeting, some even smiling. The Parkers made a point of stopping to chat, and Judge Parker complimented Reed on having secured the company of Willow Creek's most talented new resident. "The town's coming around," Reed murmured as they moved away from the Parkers. "Slower than I'd like, but coming around nonetheless." "Thanks in large part to you and your family," Zara replied. "I'm not sure I can ever repay that kindness." Reed squeezed her hand where it rested on his arm. "Your happiness is repayment enough." The evening progressed pleasantly. They shared supper at a table with Charlotte, Benjamin, and Mrs. Lynch, joined later by Reverend Martin and his wife. As darkness fell, the lanterns were lit, and the band began to play in earnest, calling couples to the dance area that had been cleared in the center of the square. Reed led Zara onto the floor for the first dance, a lively reel that had them spinning and laughing. He proved to be a surprisingly good dancer for a man who spent most of his days on horseback. "My mother insisted we all learn," he explained when Zara commented on his skill. Said no child of hers would be a clumsy oaf at social gatherings. They danced several more sets before taking a break to cool off. Reed went to fetch them punch, leaving Zara momentarily alone at the edge of the dance floor. She was watching Charlotte dance with the blacksmith's son when a voice spoke behind her. "You've certainly made yourself comfortable in our town." Zara turned to find Mrs. Holcomb standing there, resplendent in the navy blue dress Zara had finished for her just that morning. "The dress suits you beautifully, Mrs. Holcomb," Zara said, choosing to ignore the woman's tone. Mrs. Holcomb glanced down at her gown, unable to entirely suppress a pleased expression. "Your stitchwork is admirable, I'll grant you that." She looked up, her eyes sharp. "But skill with a needle doesn't erase one's past, Miss Fairchild." "No," Zara agreed quietly. "It doesn't, but it can help build a future." "A future with Reed Lynch," Mrs. Holcomb raised an eyebrow. "The Lynches are one of the oldest families in the county." Reed could have his pick of respectable young women. The word stung, but Zara refused to show it. "Reed is a grown man capable of making his own choices, Mrs. Holcomb. Indeed he is, and those choices reflect on his family and their standing in this community." The older woman leaned closer. "I wonder if he knows everything about your past, Miss Fairchild. Every detail." Before Zara could respond, Reed returned, 2 cups of punch in hand. His expression darkened as he took in the scene. "Mrs. Holcomb," he said coolly, "I see you're admiring Miss Fairchild's handiwork." "The dress is most becoming," Mrs. Holcomb straightened. "Mr. Lynch, yes, Miss Fairchild is undeniably skilled. I was just expressing my concern regarding her suitability for certain social positions in our town." Reed's jaw tightened, but his voice remained controlled. "I believe Miss Fairchild has demonstrated her character through her actions since arriving in Willow Creek. As for her suitability for any position, that judgment is best left to those directly concerned." It was a gentle but firm dismissal, and Mrs. Holcomb recognized it as such. With a thin smile, she inclined her head. "Of course, do enjoy the remainder of the evening." She glided away to join a group of ladies near the refreshment table. "I'm sorry," Reed said, handing Zara a cup of punch. "Margaret Holcomb has appointed herself the conscience of Willow Creek. She means well in her way." "She's not entirely wrong," Zara replied softly. "My past is complicated, and there are things I haven't told you." Reed studied her face in the lantern light. "Would you like to go somewhere quieter to talk?" Zara nodded, suddenly finding it difficult to breathe amid the crowd and noise. Reed set down their cups and led her away from the square, toward a small garden behind the church, where benches had been placed among flowering bushes. The sounds of the social faded to a distant murmur as they sat side by side. "Whatever you want to tell me," Reed said, "know that it won't change how I feel about you, Zara." She looked at him, this man who had defended her from the moment they met, who had seen something in her worth believing in when others saw only her mistakes. He deserved the truth, all of it, even if it meant losing him. "When I came to Denver," she began, "I had nothing. No money, no connections, just my skill with a needle. I found work sewing for a dressmaker, but the pay was barely enough to survive on. Then I met Madame Rosalind. She offered me a position in her establishment room, board, and good wages to make costumes for her girls." She paused, gathering her courage. "At first that was all I did, I sewed. But then there was a winter when business was slow and Madame suggested I might entertain gentlemen callers, just temporarily," she said, "just until spring brought more customers." Zara couldn't look at Reed as she continued. "I told myself it was no different than marrying for security rather than love, a transaction between consenting adults, and for a time, I almost believed it. I was selective about my clients, and Madame respected that. But each time a piece of me went numb." She finally raised her eyes to his. "So yes, Mrs. Holcomb's insinuations are based in truth. I was a fallen woman in every sense of the word." Reed was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dim light. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle. "Did you have any other choices?" The question surprised her. "What choices?" Reed repeated. "When you made that decision, did you have other options that would have kept you fed and sheltered?" Zara thought back to that desperate winter. "No. Not really." Reed nodded, as if she had confirmed something he already knew. "We all do what we must to survive, Zara. Some of us are fortunate enough to have family, land, resources to fall back on. Others have to make harder choices." He took her hand between both of his. "I won't pretend your past doesn't matter. It's shaped you into the woman you are today, the woman I've come to care for deeply. But it doesn't define you, and it certainly doesn't disqualify you from happiness." Tears welled in Zara's eyes. "How can you be so understanding?" "Most men would." "I'm not most men," Reed interrupted. "And I've lived long enough to know that life is rarely black and white. My own mother was a saloon singer before she met my father. Did Charlotte tell you that?" Zara nodded. "She mentioned it. What she probably didn't tell you is that Ma did more than sing. When times were lean, she did what she had to do to survive." Reed's eyes held her steadily. Pa knew. It didn't change how he felt about her. He used to say that the past is a place to learn from, not live in. He released her hand to brush away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "When I said I'd be the man who lifts you, I meant it. Not because I think you need saving, but because I see your strength and want to stand beside it, with it." "Reed," Zara whispered, her heart too full for more words. He leaned forward, cupping her face gently between his hands, and kissed her. Unlike their previous kisses, this one held nothing back. It was a promise, an affirmation, a declaration that transcended words. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. "I love you, Zara Fairchild," Reed said simply. "Have since the moment I saw you standing in the street, facing down this town with your chin held high." Joy exploded in Zara's chest, bright and terrifying. "I love you too," she admitted, "though I never expected to, never thought I could." Reed smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling in the way she had come to adore. "That's the thing about love. It finds you when you least expect it." They sat together in the garden for some time, talking softly, sharing pieces of themselves that neither had revealed to another soul. When they finally returned to the social, the dancing was still in full swing, but the mood had shifted to slower, more intimate melodies. Reed led Zara back onto the dance floor, drawing her closer than propriety strictly allowed. She didn't resist, fitting herself against him as if she belonged there. Together they swayed to the music, oblivious to the glances some approving, some scandalized cast their way. "People are watching," Zara murmured. "Let them," Reed replied. "Let them see what happiness looks like." The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of dancing, laughter, and stolen kisses in shadowy corners. When the last dance was called, Reed held Zara as if she were made of porcelain, his eyes never leaving hers. "Stay with me," he whispered as the final notes faded. "In Willow Creek. Make a life here." "I'm not going anywhere," Zara promised. The social came to an end with a final toast from Judge Parker to the town founders. As the crowd began to disperse, Reed and Zara made their way through the square, stopping to bid goodnight to Charlotte and Mrs. Lynch. "You two look happy," Charlotte observed with a knowing smile. "We are," Reed confirmed, his arm secure around Zara's waist. Mrs. Lynch studied them for a moment, her expression softening. "It's good to see you smile again, son, really smile." She turned to Zara. "Sunday dinner tomorrow, Miss Fairchild." "I'd be honored, Mrs. Lynch." "Eliza," the older woman corrected. "I think it's time you called me Eliza." It was a small gesture, but its significance wasn't lost on either Zara or Reed. As they walked away, Reed squeezed Zara's waist gently. "That's high praise from Ma," he murmured. "She doesn't let just anyone use her given name." Zara leaned into his embrace, feeling truly accepted for the first time in longer than she could remember. The weeks that followed the Founders' Day social were among the happiest of Zara's life. Her dress shop flourished, with orders coming in not just from Willow Creek but from neighboring communities as well. She hired a young apprentice, 16-year-old Lucy Weber, to help with the simplest tasks, allowing Zara to focus on the more complex commissions. Reed courted her openly and properly, taking her for drives in the countryside, escorting her to church each Sunday, and joining her for supper several evenings a week. They were rarely alone, always in public, or with family present, but the moments they did steal together were precious beyond measure. Autumn painted the landscape in fiery hues as September gave way to October. The air grew crisp, and Zara found her shop busy with orders for winter clothing, warm wool dresses, coats, and heavier garments to withstand the coming cold. On a golden afternoon in mid-October, Reed arrived at the shop just as Zara was closing for the day. Lucy had already left, and Zara was just recording the day's transactions in her ledger when the bell above the door jingled. "I'm afraid we're closed for," she began, looking up to find Reed standing there, a nervous energy radiating from him. "Reed, I wasn't expecting you today." "I know," he said, removing his hat. "I hoped you might join me for a ride. There's something I'd like to show you." His serious tone piqued her curiosity. "Of course, let me just get my shawl." They rode out of town on horseback, Zara comfortable now on the gentle mare Reed had lent her for their excursions. He led her along a path that wound through stands of aspen, their leaves shimmering gold in the late afternoon light. After about a mile, they crested a small hill, and Reed drew his mount to a halt. Below them lay a clearing nestled against the side of a larger hill. A small creek ran along one edge, and at the center stood a cabin not new, but well built and recently repaired from the look of it. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, suggesting someone was in residence. "What is this place?" Zara asked, taking in the picturesque setting. "Lynch land," Reed replied. "The old foreman's cabin. My grandfather built it for his right-hand man back when the ranch was first established." He gazed at it thoughtfully. "It's been empty for years, ever since old Jim Peterson passed, but I've been fixing it up these past few weeks." Zara looked at him questioningly. "For a new foreman," Reed shook his head, his eyes meeting hers. "For us if you'll have me." Zara's breath caught in her throat as his meaning became clear. Reed dismounted and came to help her down from her horse. When her feet touched the ground, he kept hold of her hands, his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. "Zara Fairchild," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "I love you. More than I thought it possible to love another person. These past months have been the happiest of my life, and I can't imagine a future that doesn't have you in it." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a ring, a delicate gold band set with a single diamond that caught the late afternoon sun. "This was my grandmother's," he explained. "Pa gave it to Ma when they married, and she passed it to me when Pa died." He took a deep breath. "Zara, would you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to Zara's eyes, blurring her vision. This moment, a good man offering his name, his heart, his future to her freely and with full knowledge of who she was, and what she had done was one she had never dared to imagine for herself. "Reed," she managed through her emotion, "are you certain?" "The gossip, the talk, let them talk," he interrupted gently. "I'm not proposing to the town of Willow Creek. I'm proposing to you the woman who has shown more courage, grace, and determination than anyone I've ever known. The woman I want to build a life with." Zara looked from his earnest face to the cabin below, where their future might take shape, then back to the ring gleaming in its velvet nest. The choice before her was clear and suddenly very simple. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "Yes, Reed Lynch, I will marry you." Joy transformed his features as he slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had been made for her hand alone. Then he was lifting her, spinning her in a circle as she laughed through her tears. When he set her down, his lips found hers in a kiss that sealed their promise to one another. When they finally broke apart, Reed rested his forehead against hers. "I thought we might marry before the first snow," he suggested. "Give us time to settle in before winter comes in earnest." Zara nodded, unable to stop smiling. "I'd like that. A small ceremony. Whatever you want," Reed assured her, "though Charlotte will be disappointed if she doesn't get to help plan at least some festivities." "I wouldn't dream of denying her that pleasure," Zara laughed. Hand in hand, they walked down the hill toward the cabin that would become their home. Reed had clearly been working hard to prepare it. The exterior had been freshly chinked and painted, the porch repaired, and new glass installed in the windows. Inside, the main room was warm and inviting, with a fire crackling in the stone hearth. The furnishings were simple but good quality: a sturdy table with chairs, a comfortable-looking sofa, bookshelves already stocked with volumes. Through an open door, Zara glimpsed a bedroom with a large four-poster bed that looked newly made. "It's not as grand as some," Reed said, watching her reaction, "but there's room to expand when our family grows." The thought of their children brought fresh tears to Zara's eyes. Another dream she had tucked away as impossible now suddenly within reach. "It's perfect," she assured him. "Absolutely perfect." They shared a simple meal that Reed had prepared ahead of time, sitting before the fire and talking of their plans. Zara would keep her shop in town, riding in each day as Reed did for ranch business. The cabin was close enough to make the journey reasonable, but far enough from Willow Creek to give them privacy and peace. As the sun began to set, Reed reluctantly suggested they should return to town before full darkness made the ride treacherous. Before they left, he pulled Zara into one more lingering kiss. "Soon," he murmured against her lips, "I won't have to say goodnight to you at your shop door. Soon you'll be Mrs. Reed Lynch, and this will be our home." "Soon," Zara agreed, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The news of their engagement spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. Most reactions were positive, the Lynches were well respected, and Zara had won over many with her skill and dedication to her business. There were, of course, some who disapproved, Mrs. Holcomb chief among them. But their voices were increasingly in the minority, as the town embraced the romance of the story, the fallen woman and the cowboy who had lifted her up. Charlotte threw herself into wedding preparations with characteristic enthusiasm, while Mrs. Lynch Eliza offered quiet support and practical advice. Reverend Martin agreed to perform the ceremony, his kind eyes twinkling as he told Zara that marriages of true hearts were among his favorite duties. The wedding took place on the first Saturday in November, a crisp, clear day with the mountains standing sharp and magnificent against a deep blue sky. The ceremony was held in the Lynch ranch house, with family and close friends gathered in the main room that had been decorated with autumn flowers and greenery. Zara wore a gown of ivory silk that she had labored over in secret moments at her shop, the most beautiful garment she had ever created, with delicate lace at the bodice and tiny pearl buttons down the back that echoed her founder's day dress. Charlotte had arranged Zara's honey-brown hair in an elegant style crowned with a circlet of small white roses. Reed waited for her at the front of the room, looking both nervous and exultant in a new black suit. Benjamin stood beside him as best man, while Charlotte served as Zara's maid of honor. But it was Mrs. Lynch Eliza who surprised Zara most, stepping forward to escort her down the makeshift aisle in the absence of a father. "Every bride deserves someone to give her away," the older woman had said simply when she offered. "I'd be honored if you'd allow me to stand in." Now, as they moved slowly through the gathering, Eliza leaned close to whisper, "You've made my son happier than I've ever seen him. For that alone, I would welcome you to this family, but I've come to value you for yourself, Zara. You belong here now." Tears threatened to spill over, but Zara blinked them back. When they reached Reed, Eliza placed Zara's hand in her son's, then stepped aside to take her seat in the front row. Reverend Martin's service was brief but meaningful, focusing on love, forgiveness, and new beginnings. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Reed lifted Zara's face to his with gentle fingers and kissed her with such tenderness that several of the women present dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The celebration afterward was joyous good food, music provided by local musicians, and dancing that continued well into the evening. As dusk fell, Reed led his bride away from the festivities, helping her into the wagon he had decorated with ribbons and flowers for the occasion. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Lynch?" he asked, his smile containing all the love and promise Zara could ever have wished for. "More than ready, Mr. Lynch," she replied, her heart so full it seemed impossible it could be contained within her chest. They drove through the gathering darkness toward their cabin, the stars emerging one by one above them like blessings scattered across the heavens. As they crested the hill overlooking their new home, Zara saw that lanterns had been lit inside, casting a warm glow through the windows Charlotte's doing, no doubt, ensuring the newlyweds would return to a welcoming abode. Reed helped her down from the wagon, and before she could take a step toward the cabin, swept her into his arms. Zara laughed in surprise, wrapping her arms around his neck as he carried her across the threshold. "Welcome home, Zara Lynch," he said softly, setting her gently on her feet in the main room. Zara looked around at the space that was now truly theirs, the fire burning low in the hearth, the comfortable furnishings, the bookshelves lined with volumes both his and hers. On the mantel sat her most treasured possession, the daguerreotype of her parents, placed there by Reed as a gesture of honoring her past even as they built their future. "It's really ours," she marveled. "Our home, our life together." Reed drew her into his embrace. "The first day of forever," he murmured against her hair, "and I plan to make every day better than the last." That night, as they came together as husband and wife for the first time, Zara discovered yet another kind of falling into a love so deep and true that it erased all memory of her past descent. In Reed's arms, she found not only passion but a profound tenderness that healed wounds she hadn't realized were still open. "I love you," she whispered in the darkness as they lay entwined, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls around them. "I never thought I could be this happy." Reed's fingers traced the curve of her cheek. "This is just the beginning, my love, just the beginning." The years that followed proved Reed's promise true. Their life together unfolded like the pages of a beloved book, each chapter bringing new joys and challenges that they faced side by side. Zara's dress shop continued to thrive, expanding to include ready-made garments and eventually hiring 2 more apprentices besides Lucy. Reed took on more responsibility at the ranch as his mother grew older, but always made time for his family, never becoming the absent workaholic his father had been. Their first child, a son they named James after Reed's father, arrived a year after their wedding, a sturdy boy with Reed's russet hair and Zara's amber eyes. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth, named for both their mothers. Their family was completed 3 years after that with the birth of another son, Robert. The cabin expanded along with their family, additional rooms built as needed, a larger kitchen for Zara's cooking experiments, a study for Reed's ranch accounts, a garden where Zara grew herbs and flowers. They added a stable for their horses and a small workshop where Reed taught James and Robert woodworking as they grew. Willow Creek changed too, growing from a small settlement to a proper town with a schoolhouse, a bank, and eventually a train station that brought increased business and visitors. Zara's reputation as a skilled dressmaker spread throughout the territory, bringing customers from as far away as Denver and Pueblo. Even Mrs. Holcomb eventually softened her stance, especially after Zara donated her services to create costumes for the children's Christmas pageant one year when funds were tight. By the time the Holcombs' first grandchild was born, Margaret was commissioning Zara to create the christening gown. On a warm summer evening in 1888, 10 years after Reed had first declared he would be the man to lift her, Zara sat on the porch of their home, watching her children play in the yard while Reed finished his chores in the barn. James, at 9, was already showing signs of his father's height and calm demeanor. Elizabeth, 7, had her mother's talent with a needle and was forever creating tiny garments for her dolls. Little Robert, 4, was a bundle of energy, currently chasing a butterfly with delighted squeals. Charlotte, who had married the blacksmith's son 5 years earlier and now had 2 children of her own, often remarked on how perfect the Lynch children were, a blend of both parents' best qualities. "They're hardly perfect," Zara would reply with a laugh, "but they are perfectly loved." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Reed emerged from the barn and crossed to the porch. Though a decade had passed, he still moved with the same fluid grace that had first caught Zara's eye. His hair showed hints of silver at the temples now, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but to Zara, he was more handsome than ever. He sat beside her on the porch swing, his arms settling comfortably around her shoulders as they watched their children play. "Happy?" he asked, a question he still posed regularly, as if needing to confirm that the life they had built together fulfilled her. "Completely," Zara assured him, leaning into his embrace. It was the same answer she had given for 10 years, and it had never been a lie. Reed pressed a kiss to her temple. "Do you ever think about that day, when we first met?" "Often," Zara admitted. "How could I not? It was the day everything changed." "For the better, I hope," Reed said with a smile in his voice. Zara turned to face him, taking in the beloved features that had become as familiar to her as her own. "For the infinitely better. You promised to lift me, Reed Lynch. But I don't think either of us realized how high we would soar together." Reed's eyes, still as green and clear as the day they met, filled with the same love that had sustained them through a decade of marriage. "I knew," he said softly. "From that very first moment, when you stood in the street with your head held high despite the whispers, I knew you were the one I'd been waiting for my whole life." As the last light of day faded from the sky and their children's laughter filled the air around them, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From orphaned child to fallen woman to beloved wife and mother, each step, even the painful ones, had led her here, to this life that exceeded her wildest dreams. The fallen woman had indeed been lifted, not just by the love of a good man, but by her own courage in reaching for a happiness she hadn't believed she deserved. And in that lifting, she had discovered the most precious truth of all, that sometimes falling can be the first step toward learning to fly.